So very first thing, a little bit about me. I got already introduced by Fabio. My name is Jacopo. I'm the founder of SIGAP. Recently, we joined Revo, which is a cloud provider based in Italy. And so we are kind of shifting our focus, from delivering pure Kubernetes to a wider mission, sort of. So we're going to actually play the game of implementing a new cloud provider. But that being said, the stuff that I like, as Fabio said, I'm a technical person. I'm extremely technical, actually. So I started as a software engineer, turned into DevOps, moved to infrastructure, and this is why I'm not talking here because we are sponsoring. I'm talking here because it's been like 10 years or more that we have been part of this community, and I deeply believe that the technical value of the conference, so this is what I'm going to focus about. Despite having the talk, which still being sort of high level. Do you see well the slides, right? Okay, so anyway, who am I? First of all, how you can reach me? You can reach me on X, you can reach me on LinkedIn, you can reach me however you want. Nardiello, that's my tag. I'm actually a weird DevOps. I like to talk to people, so you can reach out to me and have a beer together after, and good feedback, bad feedback, whatever. It's it's valuable for me, and I grow learning from others, and I hope others grow learning from me. So it's super welcome. Who am I? I'm currently a CNCF ambassador, and I'm part of the founding advisory board of the Linux Foundation Europe. And I'm a dad. I have 2 kids. And I always say this because it's part of the growing within the community. When I started, I didn't have kids. So it's, it's a human experience. Okay, so just mandatory slide about SIGAP, who we are, what we do. As I said, we are actually a weird company, meaning that we were crazy enough many years ago to start focusing on Kubernetes. We have been doing Kubernetes for 7 years now, something like that. That's all we do. We start from Kubernetes, we finish with Kubernetes, and when we say Kubernetes, we actually say the landscape. You can imagine, okay? So it's not just Kubernetes; it's a lot of stuff. And we were born as a software vendor, so we were born as our mission was to enable enterprises to adopt open source technologies, basically, okay? On infra automation, not just wide enterprise technologies. So. We were crazy enough to start our own Kubernetes distribution, and that's our core product. We have our own distro, our own platform, as they like to call them now. So if you are curious, you can check it out, or we have our own stand, we can talk about it, and that's our main job. We maintain the platform, and we help customers adopting it, and we maintain it for them. Very recently, and by very recently, I mean last week, we were acquired by Revo, and we have a very challenging, as I mentioned, industrial plan together. So that's going to be cool. If you want to talk about it, please reach out. Very first thing, Julie already mentioned it. Please rate my talk on Joined-in. Okay, any feedback is good feedback. So here is the link if you want to go straight to my talk. The very important thing, and I highlight it, is don't be positive and constructive feedback, please, okay? That's the only rule I ask you to follow. Last thing, before we actually dive into deeper stuff, I want to highlight that we are going to have Case Italy, so Kubernetes Community Days. That's the CNCF sponsored, sort of, official event. We have been organizing with a bunch of core organizers, which are all over the conference. If you're interested, go there, buy the ticket. It's going to be in June. It's going to be, last year, it was great. It was amazing, okay? And I hope that this year is going to be even more amazing. So we wait you there. what I like is to focus on what we, as a very first thing, I want to, what's going to be the takeaway from this session? What are you going to learn into this session? So the very first thing is you're going to learn what security means as a wider term within Kubernetes. So I'm a security person, or I need to start focusing on security topics. Where do I start? What do I do? What should I learn? It's not taken for granted, especially with security. With security, you have either super deep topics or glitter level topics, okay? Talks and material. This aims to be something in the middle, okay? Something which is not going to be too technical, but at the same time, I want you to go home and know exactly what you need to study if you want to, to plan your next steps. So that's the very first thing. The second thing is going to be actionable. So I'm going to mention real technologies, I'm going to mention real practices, stuff that you can really start to look right away. And third thing, I'm not here to sell you anything. So I'm not going to position whatever tool or whatever magic. That's not the kind of talk. I'm going to focus on open standards, open technologies. That's a top priority, and I mean topics, what you need to learn. Okay, as a very first thing, I want to start with stepping back a little bit and see where we are, okay? And to understand where we are, I think it's good to see where we were. And for those who were around AC, it's before Christ, so it's a long time ago. At least it feels like, okay? 2016, it was the year where we had the orchestration war. Kubernetes was not clear, was going to be the real orchestrator. Docker was around, Docker Enterprise, maybe it's Docker Swarm, maybe it's Mesos, maybe it's something else. And it was like around 2017 where we had Kubernetes emerging as a new standard, and that was its competitive advantage, sort of. So foundation, the only tool with a foundation and not a company, that was a key element because it allowed for open governance, and that was its only unique feature. All the other, many other orchestrators were actually more mature, more production grade, more tested, but the real problem is that they didn't have an organizational model allowing them to grow in a healthy way. And that was where Kubernetes started to shine, defining new open standards. And that's what happened really in a very clear way in 2018 and 2019. And between 2019 and 2020, sort of what we saw was a consolidation of the landscape. So we started to see, yes, we have Kubernetes, okay, that's something we get. And then what do we use for monitoring? What do we use for policy management? What do we use for, all the other CI/CD and all the other things? And that's bring us today. And the last couple of years, I'm sure that you, as me, we have been hearing a lot about platforms. It was all about platforms, okay? And I bet that a very good percentage of you works in platform engineering teams or platform teams or whatever, right? With the merging of IDPs, internal developer platforms. So, and that was kind of interesting because it was embraced by management. So you had this, an army of consultants, going around and spreading the word about self-serving infrastructure and so on. And that was the natural evolution of the whole DevOps movement that we had as of today. And of course, that came with many, fake expectations, sort of. So Kubernetes started to feel like a silver bullet for infrastructure automation. And that was good because it allowed for adoption. But on the other hand, it's not. It's far from being, a silver bullet, and it does require a lot of work. So anyway, we are today. The good news is that we are in production with Kubernetes. Likely you are in production with Kubernetes. The bad news is that we are in production with Kubernetes. So, and we need to handle that. And so anyway, we are reaching maturity, and this I wanted to start with. This is the maturity. Oops, sorry. And this is how it actually feels many times, okay? And whoever has been working to put Kubernetes in prod, you go to the CNCF landscape, you try to understand what you need to use and what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. You start to hear words which are actually super complex topics like Istio service mesh or whatever, and you start to wrestle your way around Kubernetes until you learn that it's, in the end, there's always that bash script or whatever else behind it. Anyway, what now? Truth is that if we start to look into a wider ecosystem, and I think that this is it has to be part of the conversation, we see that shit is hitting the fan a little bit, okay? For two main reasons regarding our scope. First of all, unfortunately, we are not anymore in a fully peaceful times, and that's reality. And that has a consequence, the fact that all the European Union, the state, and they are starting to really focus on regulatory push. So if you, like us, work a lot with customers, you see this every day. And you see this in a way that it's beyond doubt, okay? So you need to start to think about compliance. You need to start to think about many other things where, many years ago it was just another word. And so we are today, that's a core belief that we have. Chaos is expanding. The eruption is sort of happening, and right now is reaching security teams. And for the very first time, we see platform teams that needs to start collaborating or that are subject to security teams. And there is a shift happening. And by a shift, it means that standard security people, they are not used to talk about the same language as we do. And as we do, I talk about infra people, okay? They are used to talk about threat modeling, about blue teams, red teams, about threat analysis, about, pen testing, penetration testing, posture management, and so on. But this is very far from what we actually do. And actually, it's very far from what we have to do to have secure infrastructures, okay? So they sort of need to adapt, and they are, for the very first time, starting to focus on more infra topics. And I don't want to talk about DevSecOps, what it means, what it doesn't mean, okay? Infra topic, it means elastic workloads, API-driven infrastructure, immutable infrastructure, etc., etc., etc. It's a completely new topic, and mostly they are unprepared, okay? So, and this connects to what I want you to bring home from this talk. You need, the aim is that you bring this presentation to your security people, and you tell them this is what you need to learn. Okay, good luck. And so there is a drift in the standard set of skills when it comes to conversations around security. So let's start by defining what security is. And this is actually ChatGPT answering, because why not? And it was a pretty good answer, actually. And so I want to just read out loud the highlighted things. Incorporate security throughout the software development lifecycle, SDLC, in a way that's integral to the deployment and management of applications. It's pretty good. I mean, to me, it makes sense. It's what cloud security means to me. And then it's more than just securing the cloud infrastructure. It's not about, okay, I have my AWS deployments, or I have my private cloud, or my on-prem. It's not just that. Unfortunately, it's much bigger than that. It's about ensuring that security is a foundational component of the entire system's architecture and operations. And this is exactly what we're going to focus on today. So the key idea is that it has to be part of your SDLC, software development lifecycle, and it's a foundational piece of your overall architecture, and it goes way beyond just securing endpoints or having a landing zone. It's much deeper than that. And let's start before I go, I go on, all this stuff, it's my interpretation, okay? It's what I learned from doing this job for whatever. And so take it for a grain of salt, and this is the stuff I want to discuss in case you want to discuss. So it's just my own opinion. Anyway, what are the macro groups when we talk about security? We talk about artifact management, as we said, but I highlighted two things: artifact and dependencies, because that's a big part. All the SBOM, all the bill of materials, all the VEX, all these discussions, they are very important right now. And then artifact management, of course. And then we have SDLC and pipelines. This is where we, as an industry, where we have been focusing for the past 10 years. Okay, a few years ago it was all about CI/CD pipelines. How do I structure my CI/CD pipelines in a good way? How do I use Jenkins or whatever else in a good way? That was the standard DevOps. And then we have the runtime part. Runtime part, it's okay, I'm within the cluster. What happens? What now? Okay. And if we want to explode it a little bit, I identified some golden pillars, which are the actual areas where we need to focus. So there is dependency management, as I said. What are my dependencies? And the dependencies of my dependencies, because these are exactly the same thing. These are your dependencies too. Where do I store my stuff? How do I ship my stuff to production? How do I build it in a safe way? How do I sign it? How do I store it? How do I ship it to my target environments? And then we have the target Kubernetes. Then we have, of course, this is the value chain. How do I reach production? So from development, low value, where I can iterate fast, to production, where every mistake, it's a big mistake, it's very expensive, and you cannot iterate even if you wanted to. And then there is the last pillar. So runtime Kubernetes is base infra hardening, security at runtime, network, of course, identities. How do I manage identities, application identities, user identities, in elastic workloads? And then we have the forgotten son of all the list, which is compliance and regulations, where you have done all the job, you spent the last year automating everything, you have the most amazing infrastructure ever, and then someone comes and say, this is not compliant. And you're just like, oh, come on, really? But that happens all the time, okay? And so we need to keep that, and actually, right now, we have the tools to automate it. Let's start diving a little bit into the very first macro area, so pillar 1 and 2, which is artifacts and dependencies. So as you all probably know, containers, these are just processes, right? And within containers, one of the key advantages of containers is that you set in stone what you can isolate your dependencies, and you can set in stone what's the state of your application and everything that is required to run it. That's great, but unfortunately, sometimes we all forgot about one key detail, which is what is the base image that we use. Why? Because base images, they all have inside other dependencies. You have a whole operative system, usually, which is very broad, and it's a big surface, possible surface where you can be attacked. And so you always have to keep in mind that you have your application dependencies, your system dependencies. This is where we usually focus. And then you need to remember that you also have dependencies within your images, okay? And so how do you tackle that? Where do you need to focus? What do you need to focus on? You need to focus on, first of all, have a bill of material of your dependencies and of your images dependencies. If you use Docker Hub stuff, it's not granted that you have that, okay? There are secure images that you can use. I want to mention ChainGuard here because it's, or Wolfie, okay? These guys, that's what they do, and it's super interesting, the job that they have been doing. And in order to do it in a safe way, they have been rewriting the whole tool chain of how to managing dependencies. So if you are a technical person and you want to dive deeper into this, you go home and you start to look into Wolfie and how it's built. It's going to be a super interesting learning path. The last thing is focus on signing your images, of course. So make sure that you sign your artifacts, and whenever you store them, make sure that you know what you have built and that what you are going to deploy is what you have built, okay? Second macro area, pillar number 3, which is safe builds and pipelines. So I cannot, it's physically impossible to dive deep into how to build a secure pipeline. It's a super big topic. And there are many aspects. This is the image that you see here. Let me explain what it is. This is our reference architecture for secure pipelines. So this is what, after 10 years doing that, this is what we usually implement and deliver and what we usually maintain. This is our best of breed, okay? We can dive deeper into this later if you're interested. But the key point is that, and this is where I think is the value for you, is that you should make sure that within your pipelines, okay, you should have vulnerability checks. So make sure that your applications and your dependencies are checked continuously. You should have artifact management. So, okay, I have made sure that my base images are cool and they are safe. Where do I store my stuff? So where is your repository, your artifact place? That's the thing. So make sure to push to safe in a safe place. And again, it's not to be taken for granted. And then you have your pipelines are also your gatekeepers, sort of. So it's where you establish the rules. What do you allow? What are the rules to actually arrive to production? What are the rules to proceed within your value chain? And so you can do policy enforcing within the pipelines, and you can define what are the quality, what is your definition of quality. Let's move on to in-cluster security. So as we know, Kubernetes delivers a standard set of stuff that you can use to secure your Kubernetes clusters. And we are talking about role-based access control. So what are the rules for the stuff that your users and that your applications can do within the cluster? Make sure to use a CNI plugin that allows you to establish network policies. Not all of them. There are different CNI plugins with a different depth of policies that you can enforce. Make sure to use in a good way namespaces and quotas. So namespaces allow you to kind of soft divide your workloads within the cluster. Make sure to use them wisely. Ensure pod security policies, well, not anymore, pod security standards and admissions. Of course, we have our ingresses, right? Our sort of load balancers within the clusters. Again, this is an entry point for north-south network. You can establish rules within it. If you're using Nginx, if you're using HA proxy, if you're using whatever else, that's a place where you need to put your configurations. And then make sure to properly tune etcd. So if you are using a cluster which is not managed, so if you're running your own clusters, or if you are having your own clusters within your own data center, make sure that the etcd is backed up, very first thing, and it's encrypted. Let's talk very quickly about secrets. So secrets, they do deserve a mention of notice, meaning that by design, they have not so good defaults. As we all know, they are stored in base 64. It's a very well-known thing, so I won't get, it might be good enough for you, it might not be good enough for you, that's up to you. But the key problem here is that base secrets, they are lacking some basic stuff. Basic stuff is, how do I rotate them properly? Okay, that's probably the biggest thing in my opinion. Or how do you audit what happens on your secrets? Okay, so it's very difficult to manage secrets at scale whenever you have more than one cluster, 2 clusters, 3 clusters, whatever. It starts to get impossible to keep secrets under control, and they are a key component into your security posture within your clusters. So what's the solution? A secret manager. And here I mention CyberArk because we know them a lot. There are many others, okay? The problem is that using an external secret manager, the key point is about making sure that you can rotate properly your secrets, your identities. You can integrate them in a good way within your SDLC cycle, within your pipelines. Make sure that you can, plug in your external providers in case you are managing identities outside of the clusters. And so it's sort of mandatory. If you haven't looked into that, let's talk about it. It has to be a core component of your Kubernetes installation. Let's talk very quickly also about more advanced topics, advanced stuff that you need to look into, and when it talks about running your Kubernetes in a safe way. So very first thing, runtime security. So I have my Kubernetes clusters. How do I make sure that my the stuff that I run within it makes sense? It's secure. And we have a couple of projects which I think are worth exploring. They do different things, okay? But Falco for runtime security, it's sort of probably the most mature project within the CNCF landscape that focus on that. There is Sysdig behind them. They are the original contributors. It's a pretty established project. I totally recommend it. And then we have more exotic stuff like Kata containers. Kata containers is a runtime to isolate differently your runtime and your containers beyond what usual containerd is doing, assuming that you're using containerd or CRI-O or whatever. Then we have, secrets management, we already mentioned it, policy controllers and admission webhooks. Again, policy management and policy as code, it's one of the big things that, in my opinion, Kubernetes allowed us to introduce and to step up to the next level. For the very first time with Kubernetes, we can have Gatekeeper, we can use stuff like Kyverno, we can use stuff like OPA, Open Policy Agent. So there are many ways to actually enforce policy as code within your cluster. This is something where you definitely need to put a lot of attention into. I also want to mention Authorize. It's not very famous, but it's a pretty cool concept where you can define at a higher level your policies, and it does automatically translate them into policies for, into YAML that your cluster can understand. Then we have, of course, securing network. I'm on time this time. So we have securing network. Of course, when we talk about network, we talk about north-south and we talk about east-west. So north-south, I have my packets coming from outside. I have to distribute them across my services. How do I do them? There are many advanced and pretty mature solutions right now. We have Tegera and Calico. We have Cilium. Currently, we are working a lot with the Cilium people. They're super cool. They've been acquired by Cisco. I don't know what's going to happen there, but it's still, it's a super solid project, and the people working there are amazing. So absolutely, it's worth mentioning it. Then we have, east-west. So what happens within the cluster, right? So I have my network, my packets flowing around my cluster. How do I keep control on them? And then we have service meshes. This is where service meshes jump in. I mentioned Istio, of course, and then there is Kuma and Kong. Again, I recommend them because we work a lot with Kong people. They are super good, and their products are really, really worth looking into, and so it felt relevant to mention them. Then we have the whole part about identities. And yes, managing identities is super hard. It's about user identities, but more in a more complex way. It's about application identities and what are the policies around them. And there are two frameworks which are the relevant things that you should look into within the CNCF landscape, which is SPIFFE and Spire. Again, look into them. It's absolutely important. The last part is workloads isolation. So how do I isolate my clusters? And I thought that it was worth spending some time on this part. So there are three main ways about talking about isolation. How do I partition my cluster? How do I make sure that my workloads are split in a good way within the cluster? The very first thing is about soft multi-tenancy. Then we have new emerging trend, which is virtualized control planes. And then we have dedicated clusters, okay? Which one is the best? Of course, it depends on your specific use case. We can talk about it, but let's dive deeper a little bit into each one of them. Multi-tenancy. So by design, Kubernetes does not have any kind of multi-tenancy. So you cannot, it's not a multi-tenant system, period. That's nothing else to say. So you cannot, by design, isolate workloads, and it's all about building your own abstractions, basically. So You have a standard set of tools, which are the ones that we mentioned earlier, RBAC, namespace isolation, network policies, and so on. And you kind of aggregate them somehow to sort of isolate your workloads. This is how it happens and how it works within Kubernetes. So we talk about usually soft multi-tenancy, meaning that that's the only way you can achieve something similar. So there are a few projects. Either you build your own abstractions, or you can use some tools, external tools, which kind of build these abstractions for you. And I think that mentioning, again, Capsule and the Classics people, it's probably the most mature, or for sure one of the most mature projects that allow to do this. So what is the pro of implementing soft multi-tenancy within your clusters? First of all, it's efficient. It's pretty efficient. It doesn't cost too much. And, you know, it can be a great way if you control exactly what's going to run within your cluster. So you have a cluster, you need to partition it within your application teams or within your company. And, you know, implementing tenants using, for example, Capsule or whatever else, it's pretty efficient. It's, you know, it allows you to run your workloads without much overhead. And it can be great for platform engineering. I mean, all these abstractions, they can be well built within your backstage or within your portal or within your existing processes. Where it comes short, what are the cons? So you can still be beat by noisy neighbors. There are some shared components within the clusters, core DNS, just to mention one, okay? So it can still happen that something running in namespace A brings down what is running into namespace B. That's a trade-off, okay? Sometimes it's good enough, sometimes it's not. If 90% of your revenue is coming from a single application running into a single namespace, probably you should not put it into together with less critical applications, regardless of the soft multi-tenancy mechanisms that you are going to implement. And from a security standpoint, it's still the same big system. So it's, you know, you need to keep that in mind. They are living within the same cluster, okay? And so it's not, in my opinion, again, it's an opinion, specifically recommended if you need to run mission-critical stuff, okay? Let's talk very quickly about virtualized control planes. That's the cool new thing, sort of new. Actually, it's not very new, but it's the cool thing for all the nerds, Kubernetes nerds out there. It's where I spent a lot of time, my personal time. So it's basically, it's about running actual worker nodes, but to have the whole control plane fully virtualized. So you have a master cluster, and then you have all the nodes connecting to these master clusters. This master cluster is abstracting away your control planes, basically, and it's managing the control planes. Where it's good, it's, in my opinion, a super cool concept, and it does leverage all the good things about Kubernetes. It allows you to isolate in a sort of a good way your clusters and the way you run your workloads. The problem is that it's kind of in its infancy. It's not super battle tested. EKS, for example, it's built this way, or all the hyperscalers, they built their own solutions in this way. But there are no real big open references for this. Okay, there are many projects focusing on this. Again, there is Kamaji by Classics, there is vClusters by Loft, for example. But I cannot really recommend it to run stuff at scale. Maybe it's just me lacking big references. But again, in the last 7 years that I've been doing this like full time, I never had a chance to see this at scale. So I would say it's kind of early. And so I wouldn't say that this is, again, battle tested. Then we have the dedicated cluster. This is where we personally we as SIGAP, where we shine, this is what we do, this is what our platform and distribution is doing, is allowing you to do it more efficiently. The good thing is that it allows for full isolation. You can put your rules within your cluster, and you can have a real security posture on them. And so that's a good thing. The bad thing is that the operational burden is high. And so you need to have operators knowing what they're doing. You need to know the technology.
Okay.
And so this is, you need to consider your trade-offs. The very last thing that I want to mention, and this is going to be super quick because I know I'm running out of time. When it comes to running so you're still, okay, we've been talking a lot about Kubernetes, but again, we are within a cloud provider or we are within your environment. What are the things that you need to care about? Make sure to use encrypted communication within, towards your storage, in the communication between your nodes, wherever they are. Make sure, whenever possible, to use an immutable OS, so operative system for your nodes, and that's true for either if you are in private, public, or on-prem. Make sure that your control planes are private, please. It's 2024, okay? And then again, make sure to just run, verified stuff within your nodes, okay? Do not run random Docker Hub, and I'm talking, Docker Hub has been evolving in a pretty nice way over the years. So I don't mean anything bad about it, but make sure to know what are your base images, make sure to know what are your dependencies. Last but not least, this is shilling for a new project that we are going to release, which is called Permission Monitor, the whole compliance stuff. This is basically an open source project that we are going to release about managing permissions and within Kubernetes. Again, if you want to get deeper into this, let's talk about it. Conclusions. So I hope that you learned. That's a wrap. A cat, not wrap. So I hope that you learned what are the meaningful things that you need to look into after the conference. So conference, it's great to get a direction. And I hope that you got this direction from this talk. That was the goal. And I hope that you have a meaningful list of stuff to look into right afterward. If you want to talk again, let's talk about it right outside with a beer or a spritz or water, whatever else. It's a shit ton of work. Yes, I know. Thank you so much.